You stand in the great temple of the Aten as the first rays of dawn break over the limestone cliffs of Akhenaten. The year is 1346 BC. Before you, beneath the open sky where no roof interrupts the sun's path, Pharaoh Akhenaten raises his hands toward the solar disk. Beside him stands a young woman wearing the double uraeus crown of Egypt's queens. She is perhaps 15 years old. Her name is Nefertiti, and she is both his daughter and his wife. The priests chant hymns praising the Aten's life-giving rays while you watch father and daughter queen embrace in a gesture that defies every boundary humanity has drawn between parent and spouse. The same man who touches her face with conjugal tenderness once cradled her as an infant. If you're fascinated by the hidden complexities of ancient history, consider subscribing to explore more stories like this. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop a comment below. It's extraordinary that we can share this curiosity about the past together, connected across continents and centuries by our desire to understand what once was. This is not mere scandal. This is theology made flesh. A desperate attempt to concentrate divine power within a single bloodline at the moment when an empire teeters on the edge of collapse. Within 2 decades, every trace of this revolutionary pharaoh will be systematically erased from Egypt's monuments, his name chiseled away, his city abandoned to the desert, his religious vision condemned as heresy. But before the hammers fall, before the priests of Amun reclaim their power and rewrite history, one man will attempt to reshape civilization itself through marriages that blur the line between sacred duty and forbidden desire. The transformation began not with scandal, but with light. When Amenhotep IV ascended to Egypt's throne in 1353 BC, he inherited an empire that stretched from the fourth cataract of the Nile deep into Syrian territories, a realm his father Amenhotep III had governed for 38 years of unprecedented prosperity. The temples of Thebes glittered with gold tribute from vassal kingdoms. The priesthood of Amun controlled estates so vast they functioned as a state within the state, owning approximately 1/3 of Egypt's cultivatable land, commanding 80,000 slaves, and maintaining herds numbering in the hundreds of thousands. This was the world's superpower, and the young pharaoh should have been content to maintain the cosmic order that had blessed Egypt for 3 millennia. But something in Amenhotep IV's vision could not accommodate the old gods. Perhaps it was the intensity of his gaze when he watched the sun rise over the Nile, transforming darkness into light with daily precision. Perhaps it was the whispers of minor solar deities whose cults spoke of the Aten, the visible disk of the sun, as more than just Ra's manifestation. Or perhaps it was political calculation disguised as religious fervor, a recognition that the priesthood of Amun had grown powerful enough to rival the throne itself. Whatever the catalyst, by his 5th regnal year the young king had changed his name from Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. His queen Nefertiti became Nefertiti. Beautiful is the beauty of the Aten. Their daughters received names that functioned as theological proclamations. Meritaten meant beloved of the Aten. Meketaten translated to protected by the Aten. Even in the act of naming his children, Akhenaten was rewriting the relationship between heaven and earth, declaring that his family existed not merely as political figures, but as living conduits of divine power. The scope of his revolution would become clear only when he abandoned Thebes entirely and built a virgin capital in the desert, a city he called Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten, where he would conduct an experiment in faith, power, and family that had no precedent in human civilization. The scale of Akhenaten's construction reveals the totality of Akhenaten's ambition. Within 3 years, a city 5 miles long rose from empty desert on the east bank of the Nile, approximately 200 miles north of Thebes. The architects employed a revolutionary technique using standardized blocks called talatat, each roughly 20 by 10 by 15 inches, small enough for a single worker to carry, allowing for construction speed impossible with traditional massive stone blocks. Tens of thousands of laborers quarried limestone from the surrounding cliffs, transported granite from Aswan, imported cedarwood from Lebanon, and erected temples, palaces, and administrative complexes at a pace that suggested either divine inspiration or desperate urgency. The great Temple of the Aten dominated the city's heart, covering an area of 800 by 300 meters. Unlike the dark, mysterious sanctuaries of traditional Egyptian temples where only priests could penetrate inner chambers, this structure was entirely open to the sky. Sunlight flooded hundreds of offering tables arranged in precise rows throughout courtyards connected by columned halls. There were no hidden rituals, no secret mythologies requiring interpretation. The god was the sun itself, visible to all, requiring no intermediaries. The theology inscribed on tomb walls throughout Akhenaten was remarkably sophisticated. The great hymn to the Aten, possibly composed by Akhenaten himself, described a single universal creator whose power manifested through the visible solar disk. How manifold are your works, hidden from the face of man, O sole God like whom there is no other. You created the world according to your desire whilst you were alone, all men, cattle, and wild beasts. This represented a radical departure from Egypt's polytheistic tradition, positing one deity who created all nations and sustained the natural world through direct intervention. The parallels to monotheistic traditions emerging elsewhere in the ancient Near East are striking enough that scholars have speculated about possible connections to early Hebrew theology. By his 9th regnal year, Akhenaten moved his entire court to this desert capital. The royal palace stretched for over a mile along the riverbank, featuring gardens with imported flora, aviaries housing exotic birds, and pools reflecting the sky in a mirror of celestial light. Courtiers who followed their pharaoh into the desert found themselves participants in an unprecedented experiment, attempting to reorganize civilization around a new religious vision, while the daily rhythm of worship revolved around the sun's movement across the sky. Morning ceremonies began before dawn. Afternoon worship peaked at solar zenith, and evening rituals acknowledged darkness while expressing confidence in light's inevitable return. The art that decorated this revolutionary city was equally unprecedented. For 3,000 years, Egyptian sculpture had followed rigid conventions designed to capture eternal truth rather than temporary appearance, showing pharaohs in idealized, timeless poses. Now, reliefs depicted the royal family with startling intimacy. Akhenaten and Nefertiti embraced while their daughters played at their feet. The pharaoh kissed his queen in public view. Children reached toward parents beneath the Aten's rays, each ray ending in a tiny hand offering the ankh of life. This artistic revolution communicated theology through imagery. The royal family existed in a uniquely intimate relationship with the divine, and their domestic harmony reflected cosmic order. They could not look away from these images, so different from anything Egypt had seen, so unsettling in their humanity. But paradise contained complications. Nefertiti bore 6 daughters in succession, but no son emerged to inherit the throne. In a civilization where pharaonic succession required not merely bloodline but also religious qualification, political acceptance, and military support, this created a crisis that demanded unprecedented solutions. Akhenaten's religious revolution had alienated the traditional priesthood, making any heir from cadet branches of the royal family politically unacceptable. Any successor needed to be thoroughly committed to Atenism to prevent restoration of the old gods. The answer emerged gradually, encoded in reliefs and inscriptions that modern scholars have only recently begun to fully understand. Around Akhenaten's 12th regnal year, Nefertiti disappeared from historical records. Whether she died, fell from favor, or transformed into a co-regent ruling under a different name remains one of Egyptology's persistent mysteries. In her absence, the eldest daughter, Meritaten, began appearing in positions traditionally reserved for the great royal wife. She stood beside her father during religious ceremonies, received the Aten's life-giving rays in queenly posture, and wore regalia associated with Egypt's highest-ranking woman. By year 13, she had officially become Akhenaten's chief queen, a role carrying both ceremonial duties and the expectation of producing royal heirs. Nefertiti was approximately 16 years old. The psychological complexity of her situation defies easy comprehension. She had grown up surrounded by art celebrating intimate family bonds, watching herself depicted as a beloved daughter playing beneath the Aten's benevolent gaze. Now she was expected to transform filial love into conjugal devotion, to become simultaneously daughter and wife to the same man. The theological justification was internally consistent within Atenist cosmology. The Aten was described in royal hymns as containing both male and female principles, a self-generating deity that required no consort. The royal family, as earthly representatives of divine power, mirrored this cosmic unity. By marrying his daughter, Akhenaten created an earthly reflection of divine self-generation, demonstrating that the royal house contained within itself all creative forces necessary for continued rule. The practical implications were equally significant. Each daughter queen could potentially produce the male heir Akhenaten desperately needed. By keeping succession within his immediate family, he prevented rival branches from challenging his theological innovations. Any child born to these unions would be doubly royal, carrying concentrated bloodline purity unprecedented in Egyptian history. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence found in Akhenaten's ruins, include references to the king's daughter, the queen, indicating that foreign diplomats recognized Nefertiti's elevated status. She appears regularly in temple reliefs and correspondence during her 3-year tenure as chief queen, suggesting her role transcended mere ceremony. Evidence hints she may have borne children during this period, though their fates remain uncertain. They could not look away from the spectacle of daughter transformed into queen, the boundaries of family dissolved in service to theological abstraction. Around Akhenaten's 15th regnal year, the situation grew more complex. Nefertiti married Smenkhkare, a mysterious figure who may have been Akhenaten's brother, son, or adopted heir. This created an unprecedented arrangement where the daughter queen became simultaneously wife to 2 pharaohs, her father Akhenaten and his co-regent Smenkhkare. The political logic becomes clearer when viewed through the lens of Akhenaten's diplomatic failures. The Amarna letters reveal an empire under siege. Vassal cities in Syria and Palestine fell to invading forces while rulers sent increasingly desperate pleas for military support. Rib Hadda of Byblos wrote, "To the king, my lord, my God, my son. May the king give thought to his city, and may the king send archers. If this year there are no archers, then all the lands of the king, my lord, will perish." But Akhenaten, consumed by religious perfection and family arrangements, sent only vague promises that never materialized. Smenkhkare, whose name meant vigorous as the soul of Ra, appears to have been chosen to provide military leadership, while Akhenaten focused on spiritual matters. His marriage to Nefertiti legitimized his position while creating a succession line preserving Akhenaten's innovations. The arrangement also freed Akhenaten to pursue a new marriage that would further concentrate divine power within his bloodline. When Nefertiti married Smenkhkare, Akhenaten elevated his next eldest daughter, Ankhesenpaaten, to chief queen. This young woman, no more than 13 or 14 years old, found herself at the center of a desperate attempt to preserve her father's revolution through procreation. Her name, "She Lives for the Aten," proved prophetic in ways reflecting both hopes and tragedies of the Amarna period. Ankhesenpaaten's elevation marked the most extreme phase of Akhenaten's family arrangements. Unlike Nefertiti, who had at least reached physical maturity before becoming queen, Ankhesenpaaten was prepubescent when she assumed royal marriage burdens, Reliefs showing her beside her father-husband are among the Amarna period's most unsettling artifacts, depicting a child in queenly regalia standing beneath the Aten's rays in poses that mimicked earlier images of Nefertiti. The psychological trauma can only be imagined. Akhenaten had watched her elder sister transform from sibling to stepmother, observing court dynamics where family relationships shifted according to political necessity. Now she faced the same transformation, expected to abandon her identity as daughter for the complex role of daughter-wife-queen. The human cost extended to Akhenaten's other daughters. Neferuaten Tasherit, Neferure, and Setepenre lived in a palace where sisters had become stepmothers, where traditional family boundaries dissolved in service to theological vision. The youngest may have been too young to understand, but older daughters must have grasped that their futures might follow similar patterns. These unions were not merely ceremonial. Tomb reliefs show Akhenaten in intimate family scenes with his daughter wives, iconography suggesting genuine marital relationships rather than purely political arrangements. The death of Meketaten, another daughter, provides tragic evidence of these relationships' physical reality. Scenes in the royal tomb showing this young princess's death are among Egyptian art's most emotionally powerful images. The royal family mourns over a woman lying on a birthing bed, surrounded by midwives and attendants. The presence of a wet nurse holding a newborn suggests Meketaten died in childbirth, possibly after bearing her father's child. The identity of Meketaten's partner remains unclear, but her death during the period when father-daughter marriages were being contracted raises disturbing questions about other daughters' fates. Childbirth was dangerous in the ancient world under optimal circumstances, but pregnancy at very young ages increased these risks substantially. They could not look away from the price of revolution, paid in daughters' blood and newborns' cries. As Akhenaten entered his final years, cracks appeared in his earthly paradise. The diplomatic situation continued deteriorating, with Egypt losing control over much of its Asiatic empire. Several daughters had died, leaving fewer potential heirs and creating succession planning gaps. The co-regency with Smenkhkare, arranged to provide military leadership continuity, lasted only a few years before that pharaoh too disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Archaeological evidence from Akhenaten's later levels suggests increasing poverty and social disorder. Grand palaces and temples were maintained, but residential districts showed abandonment and decay. Craftsmen's workshops that once produced exquisite art shuttered. The population, which may have peaked around 50,000 during the city's height, began drifting away as advancement opportunities diminished and political uncertainty grew. The religious innovations that had seemed revolutionary calcified into rigid orthodoxy. Spontaneous artistic creativity gave way to increasingly repetitive imagery focused on the same themes. The royal family worshipping beneath the Aten's rays, the sun disk bestowing life, the king and his daughter queens participating in ceremonies. The theology that initially offered direct relationship with divinity became as formal and hierarchical as the traditional religion it replaced. International observers noted Egypt's decline with increasing contempt. Hittite records describe Egyptian weakness in dismissive terms. Traditional allies questioned relationships with a pharaoh incapable of defending his territories, much less providing military support to vassals. The elaborate diplomatic marriages and gift exchanges characterizing foreign policy under Amenhotep III virtually ceased as Akhenaten became consumed by internal affairs. In his 17th regnal year, around 1336 BC, Akhenaten died. The circumstances remain mysterious. There is no evidence of violence, no indication of plague or obvious illness, no dramatic deathbed scene recorded by historians. He may have simply exhausted himself in relentless pursuit of religious perfection. Or, perhaps, the psychological strain of complex family arrangements and growing rulership pressures finally took their toll. Some evidence suggests he suffered from a genetic disorder, possibly Marfan syndrome, that could account for his unusual physical appearance and shortened lifespan. The extreme inbreeding within the royal family increased the likelihood of genetic problems, creating a vicious cycle where arrangements designed to preserve divine blood purity contributed to biological decline. His immediate successor was probably Nefertiti, a mysterious figure who may have been Nefertiti, ruling under a new name or possibly a daughter queen assuming power independently. This shadowy pharaoh ruled for perhaps 2 years, attempting to maintain the Atenist revolution while addressing practical problems Akhenaten left unresolved. But restoration forces were already in motion. The traditional priesthood, military establishment, and administrative bureaucracy had been marginalized during the Amarna period, but not destroyed. These powerful interests saw opportunity in Akhenaten's death to reverse the religious revolution and restore the old order. They could not look away from the chance to reclaim what they had lost. Restoration began swiftly. Within 3 years, Tutankhaten became Tutankhamen, honoring Amun over Aten. The court left Akhenaten for Memphis, abandoning the heretical capital to the desert. Temples of Aten were closed, priests dismissed, and wealth redirected to traditional gods. A decree at Karnak condemned the Amarna chaos. The temples had gone to pieces. The gods turned their backs upon this land. The new regime sought healing, not vengeance. After Tutankhamun's death at 19, likely from genetic disorders caused by royal inbreeding, General Horemheb seized power and erased Akhenaten's memory. Names were chiseled off walls, statues destroyed, his reign omitted from king lists. Akhenaten's revolution revealed power's limits. He ruled the richest empire yet couldn't command belief or biology. Tutankhamun's deformities, evidence of divine incest, embodied the price of fanaticism. Excavations at Amarna show laborers' bones scarred by starvation and toil sacrifices to a god who gave nothing. The city that promised light became a monument to suffering. When archaeologists unearthed Akhenaten, they found meals on tables, tools abandoned mid-work, a civilization undone by its own vision. Akhenaten remains in stone, gazing toward an indifferent sun, his failed paradise a warning that some boundaries exist not by tradition, but by necessity.